was so startling to me. And to anyone, I think, who kind of knows the House of Dior, I think that detail would be quite startling too. So even if people don't know anything about House of Dior, they can kind of just see how that filters its way into the story.
Hi, and welcome to Literary Hype. I am Stephanie, your literary hype woman, back with another author conversation, and this one comes from Australia. So a late night for me, early morning for this author, but it was so much fun to really dive into this historical fiction world that she's created. And we got it all started about a year ago with The Three Lives of Alix St. Pierre, and now Natasha Lester is back with a new novel called The Disappearance of Astrid Bricard, which involves some characters you might know from the past of her books. But there is a lot to unpack in Astrid Bricard. I put so many tabs on this book for questions. These are all questions that I had for Natasha. So buckle up and enjoy this conversation with Natasha Lester. Welcome to Literary Hype. It is so exciting to have you on. So love some good historical fiction, and you write some great ones, including your new one, The Disappearance of Astrid Bricard. And the first one I read from you is The Three Lives of Alix St. Pierre. So for anyone who has not already seen pictures or reviews of The Disappearance of Astrid Bricard, can I give us an introduction to what this book is all about?
Of course. So the book is about Astrid, who is the daughter of Christian Dior's infamous muse, Mizza. Astrid arrives in Manhattan in 1970, determined to make her mark on the fashion world, but not in the same way that her mother did. And Astrid does find fame very quickly, but just not for the things she had hoped to become famous for. And then she's invited to show her designs at the famous Fashion Battle of Versailles in 1973. And just as Astrid seems to be on the cusp of getting everything she's ever wanted, she vanishes, leaving behind only a white silk dress and the question, what happened to Astrid Bricard? And of course, you'll have to read the book to find out.
So with Alix St. Pierre, that one also dealt with Christian Dior, and now he's kind of making a comeback. Alix is making a comeback in this book. At what point in the process of writing Alix did you realize that there was another story there?
I actually wanted to write about Mizza Bricard for quite a long time. I also have another book called The Paris Secret that has a slight Dior theme in there too. That one is a little bit about Christian Dior's resistance heroine sister, Catherine. And that was the first time I'd come across Mizza when I was researching that book. And I believed everything that I was reading about Mizza in all of these non-fiction books, which was that she was this sort of demi-mondaine, which is a fancy French way of saying, you know, lady of the night, and that she swanned around in leopard print coats, wearing nothing at all underneath, and lived at the Ritz and dined, only drank champagne, didn't eat, and would just, you know, swan into Dior at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, cause a ruckus and cause havoc. And then out of that, Dior would be inspired to produce a gown. And these biographers of Dior, when they were talking about Mizza in this fashion, they always commented that she had this kind of mysterious past. Nobody quite knew where she came from. It's like she just appeared one day on the doorstep at the Avenue Montaigne in Christian Dior's salon. And, you know, being a writer, we're attracted to mystery. And I thought, oh, she'd be quite interesting to write about, being mysterious and a little bit kind of out there. But there wasn't quite enough there to write a book about her. And then when I was researching The Three Lives of Alix St. Pierre, I was doing a lot more deep dives into Dior. And as part of that, I found one article written by Professor Lourdes Font, who's the professor in fashion design at the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York. And this article, while largely about Dior, mentions Mizza, and it talked about her working at another French fashion house called Molyneux in the 1930s, and it talked about her using lily of the valley flowers to decorate the hats in Molyneux's spring 1938 collection. And to most people, that's just a random fact that would mean absolutely nothing. But to me, it was like all these lights suddenly went off in my head, because Lily of the Valley is one of the House of Dior's design codes, being one of these motifs that reappears in all of their collections. And I was like, well, hang on a second. If Mizza was using it back in 1938, 9 years before the House of Dior ever existed, then what if Mizza actually had a hand in making Lily of the Valley one of the House of Dior's codes? What if it wasn't, everyone says it's because Dior grew up surrounded by flowers, and that's why he used it in his designs. But all of a sudden I wanted to prove that, no, maybe there was this woman standing behind Christian Dior who was responsible for so much more of Christian Dior's brilliance than anybody knew. And as soon as I had that idea, I went down the research rabbit hole and found all this evidence that thankfully proved my theory. So that was really where it started, just that one article that, as I say, most people would just pass over. But for me, it made me go, okay, stop. I think there may be a story here finally. And that led me into writing The Disappearance of Astrid Bricard.
And that is a detail that you wove into the story.
Yeah,
so I like what you did there.
I had to. It was so startling to me. And to anyone, I think, who kind of knows the House of Dior, I think that detail would be quite startling too. So I thought I just have to kind of weave it in there. And so even if people don't know anything about House of Dior, they can kind of just see how that filters its way into the story.
So what is your research process like? Because these are so grounded in history. How do you go about figuring out the details that you need and what needs to become fiction?
So this one was quite different because I was really doing brand new research about Mizza that nobody had done before. And I guess the thing that infuriated me about that is all these male, predominantly biographers writing about Christian Dior and then having this sort of page about Mizza. All of this information is out there, easy enough to find. I'm not a professional researcher or a professional historian, yet I managed to find it. So how did these male biographers not find it? They just lazily repeated the same anecdotes that had kind of, been started about Mizza decades ago. So for this one, I actually used Ancestry.com, which is a database that a lot of people use for family tree research, in fact. But the good thing about that is it has documents about everyone's kind of origin. So it has people's birth certificates, etc. So because I needed to go and find what Mizza's names were to find out facts about her. And so I was able to find her birth certificate. And French birth certificates are incredible because they go back to the original handwritten birth certificate. And on that, they write, all of a person's major life events. So if you get married or divorced or you die, it's written on your birth certificate. So there were 2 marriages recorded on her birth certificate and 1 divorce recorded on her birth certificate. So that gave me a couple of different surnames that she had used, as well as her actual birth name, which wasn't Mizza. And so I just plugged all of those names in different combinations into Ancestry.com. And this stream of documents appeared, these shipping records that showed she had traveled as a 23-year-old woman from Paris to New York in 1924 to visit the Harry Angelo Company. And that was, again, probably the first real fact that made me realize that this path I was going down was right. Because, of course, then I had to research, okay, what's the Harry Angelo Company? And I discovered, so back then, there were no French designers with showrooms in New York. For a New Yorker to purchase Paris couture, you went and visited these 2 big New York dress manufacturers, and they would purchase the designs from the French couturiers, and they would show them to their New York customers, and they would select from this book of designs, and then the New York garment manufacturer would make the garment up for their customer. So the Paris couturiers would send their most trusted representative over to New York to show someone like Harry Angelo all of their designs, and then he would buy them to sell to his New York customers. And so the only reason for Mizza to be traveling from Paris to New York to visit the Harry Angelo Company would have been because she was that trusted representative showing designs to Harry Angelo. Oh, wow, that's a big responsibility for a 23-year-old woman back in 1924, when most women never even left the town they were born in, let alone travelled across the seas by themselves to show the designs. This couturier believed that Mizza had the capability to sell these designs to Harry Angelo, who was a massive garment manufacturer. He was this big company. So, but wow, this is something I had never read before about her. And I've got the shipping records, so she absolutely went there. It says on the shipping record where she went and what she did. So again, it was a bit like a trail of breadcrumbs. You find that one breadcrumb and then you find the next one, and then you find the next one and the next one. And then I also researched a lot of newspaper databases and again, plugged in all the different combinations of Mizza's names and was able to find a lot of articles and her obituary, which, her obituary writer declares that Mizza was a greater designer than Coco Chanel. And there was this other article that states in the headline, Dior's first assistant designer. So it's like, okay, here it is in absolute black and white. Mizza was Dior's first assistant designer. She was not his muse, and she did not swan around in fur coats, wearing nothing underneath, and just contributing kind of this flash of brilliance for Dior. Her name should actually have been stamped in the back of those gowns, but because she was a woman, of course, it wasn't. So that's the research process. It's very chaotic, and just it's a matter of following up every single detail, even if you think maybe it won't lead anywhere. You have to be prepared for it to fail, and to just follow it anyway. And some of those avenues I followed were just dead ends, but many of them were, produced all of this new information that just kind of blew my mind.
I mean, you're blowing my mind. These are all details that I didn't know, even though I've read the book. And so it's like that hint of what was going on is in the book, but to hear how you got to that is incredible.
Yeah.
So Mizza was real, but Astrid, Hawk, and Blythe are not. So talk a little bit about the process of creating these fictional descendants of a real person and kind of crafting their characters in this story.
Yeah, so that was really kind of fun and interesting process, because I wanted to really show that generational trauma almost, and also the way in which we think, oh, these things happened in the past, but women today, these things don't happen to women today, but they do still happen to women today. And in fact, the fashion industry has a major gender problem. We look at fashion and believe it's an industry for women, about women, because women are the major purchasers. But, if you look at the statistics, which I think, Blythe kind of quotes in the book, only 5% of Fortune 500 companies are run by women. So 95% of them are run by men. So men determine what women wear. And that just seems crazy to me. So it's not that it only happened to Mizza, it's that it's still happening to people today. So I wanted to show that, how that has kind of evolved over different decades in the fashion industry. And the 70s I thought would be really fun to look at, just purely from a writing perspective, because you've got, that great backdrop of music and disco and the Stones and all that kind of stuff going on in the 70s. But also it was kind of a pivotal moment where you've got people like John Fairchild running Women's Wear Daily, and he was such a misogynist, and he wrote some terrible things about women, and he banned them from the pages of his magazine, and he's running the most influential fashion trade Bible in America. And if you're a woman and he bans you from the pages, how is anyone ever going to find out about your designs? It's impossible. So that made me believe that was a great place to kind of situate Astrid. And then again, I wanted to show that has contemporary resonances as well with Blythe. So I decided to give Mizza a couple of these, a daughter and a granddaughter, to show that continuing process of women being cast into the role of muse, as they have been for centuries, and their talents completely overlooked, and often their talents given to men.
You do dedicate this book to, it says, for every woman who's ever had a man turn her into less than she truly is. Love this dedication. Why is now the time for a book like this?
I just think there's been this culmination of events. If you look at, someone like Britney Spears' memoir coming out, I was reading that and I was thinking, oh my God, this is the same story all over again. A woman who was a really talented singer, but everybody comments on how she looks and who she's sleeping with and who she's dating, and no one ever talks about her as a singer. Same with Taylor Swift. You look at all the Taylor Swift headlines and it's always about who she's dating and what she's wearing. It is just the biggest selling female artist of all time, and we're obsessed with who she's dating, not her success as being an inspiring woman who has broken through in the music industry in a way that a lot of women haven't been able to do. So I feel like people are becoming more and more aware of that. And I feel like Taylor's a good example, because she's quite a strong advocate of pointing out those kinds of things and not taking the shit that people kind of want to dump on her for that. So I feel like it's the perfect time when we're starting to look at how do we treat women in the media, and what kind of headlines are we using about them in order to generate clicks. And as media consumers, what are we clicking on? Because every time we click on one of those headlines about who Taylor is dating, that tells the media organizations that we want more of that kind of content, not content about how inspiring, amazing, incredible, brilliant, talented these women are. So I was kind of hoping that that message might sort of filter through as well, to think about what we click on and how we consume media.
I mean, and that Taylor Swift is a perfect example, especially with the Golden Globes in January and the response to that joke, if you want to call it.
Yes. So yeah, how was that a joke? I know.
And how Ryan Gosling was praised for not smiling, but she was called rude for it.
Exactly. You know, we think so much has changed, and then that's a classic example of where it absolutely has not.
With your research, one of the things I look forward to when reading your books is the author's note at the end, where you kind of explain what was real and what wasn't. How do you go about, do you keep notes so that you can explain what you did later, or how do you approach writing that part?
Oh, thank you for saying that. And I love that actually a lot of readers say that to me, that, you know, the author's note is like this part of the book that they love, and it's almost as good as the book itself, which is music to my ears, because authors love writing those author's notes, and, you know, it takes quite a bit of time. So it's nice to know that people don't get to the end of the book and skip that part of it. But I do often just keep a few notes of things, particularly when I'm changing things in history, and I want to flag that in the author's note for people, so that I don't get emails from people saying this didn't happen like this in 1971 or whatever. I'm declaring in the author's note that I know it didn't happen like that in 1971, and I've deliberately changed it for this reason. So I will keep a bit of a record of that. But as for the rest of it, in terms of the message I wanted to convey in this particular author's note about the media's treatment of women, that, I don't know, it was just festering inside me, I guess, almost the whole time I was writing this book. I was so outraged by it, kind of had this feeling of rage in my stomach about all of the injustices that had been, you know, all the injustices that Mizza had suffered through, and all of the injustices that women are still suffering through. And so the author's note and the way I framed that, it really just all came out in this kind of, I don't know, blurt of rage, I suppose, which then enabled me to fit in all of those pieces where I'm talking about what's real and what isn't, and also acknowledge a lot of the really important sources that I used in the book, like Robin Gabon's amazing book about the Battle of Versailles, without which I wouldn't have been able to write the Battle of Versailles part of the book. So yeah, I love it when people say that they read and love the author's note, because it's a part of the book that I love writing as much as the fiction.
And we touched on this a little bit earlier with the appearance of Alix and Pierre throughout this book as the godmother. How much fun was it for you to bring in this character from another book into this world?
Oh God, it was so much fun. I think the hard part of that was because I knew Alix so well, obviously, and Anthony so well, because I'd written a whole book about them. I had to stop myself from writing too much about them in this book. And in fact, they had to get cut back a bit, because I had gone and added them in a little bit too much in a couple of scenes, and the book was already quite long. But it was so much fun. I loved bringing them back. There's also, if readers have read another book of mine called The Riviera House, Blythe's friend Remy is one of the main characters in the Riviera House. So a lot of readers have noticed that there's two characters, in fact, in this book that haven't appeared in previous books.
Just having way too much fun on the callbacks.
I know. Oh, I love it. And it's, you know, they were perfect characters to slot into the book. And you just think, well, they already exist as kind of real people in my head. So rather than make someone up who wouldn't be quite as good, let's, you know, use these great characters that some people already have some affection for. Obviously, other readers won't know them, and that doesn't matter. But if you do, it's kind of this added bonus.
This is kind of a complex story, because you have 3 different main characters. I guess you could say 4 if you want to include Hawk, but, you know, this is woman power, so we're not including Hawk. 3 main characters and 3 different timelines. How do you keep track of weaving all of these different pieces together and where they are in the story?
I always say this is the book that nearly broke me. And if I ever have the idea to write a book with 100 years and 3 or 4 with point of view characters again, I'm just going to say, no, don't do that. It's quite hard, actually. Who knew? So I use a writing software program called Scrivener. And that's really useful because it enables you to kind of use this color coding in this, what's called the binder. And I use different color codes for different eras and different point of view characters. And it enables you to kind of see the structure of your novel at a glance in folders rather than just one long document like Microsoft Word would be. So without Scrivener, I would not have been able to write this novel. Without Scrivener, I wouldn't have been able to write any of my novels, in fact. It doesn't help you write the book or anything like that. It's not a AI kind of program. It's just an organizational tool to help you put your chapters into folders so you can overview them very easily. So that's really my secret weapon in terms of writing a book like this, because I'm a very chaotic writer and I don't write in order. So the order that you read the book is not the order that I wrote the book in. In fact, it changed structure and shape quite a number of times, and Scrivener makes it easy for you to kind of drag and drop and do that.
So this is a novel that centers heavily in the fashion world. For someone like me who is not very fashionable, the way that you wrote it is still a way that you can kind of understand what something would have looked like with these dresses and outfits and stuff. How do you approach describing fashion in a way that makes it accessible to others?
Just because I love it. And so I can see these pieces in my head, and it's that desire to convey to the reader exactly the tactile sensation of what it would be like if you were able to reach into the page and touch that dress. You know, that's kind of what you're always aiming for as a writer, to have the reader feel like it's sweeping against their calves almost. So, and I think that comes from just loving fashion so much. And I guess also, you know, the way I always think about it is, so a lot of people might not be into fashion at all, but we all wear clothes. So we're all kind of familiar with clothing and its purpose, and the fact that whilst fashion might not be something we're interested in, all of us use clothes to signal different moods, to put ourselves in our armor for different occasions and events. You know, we all selectively wear things depending on where we're going and what we're doing. So we're all kind of familiar with the way that just clothes work as kind of costume in a way. And so I feel like, you know, with that knowledge that people already had innately, they can read something like that and understand, okay, why that dress at that particular time, which then adds more to the description. So I always say that, you know, readers are always much smarter than I am. And so if I give them just enough, they know enough to be able to piece in the rest of it.
This is not your first novel that is set in France or has pieces set in France. You live in Australia. What is it about France that you love so much to keep writing about it?
Yeah, so I'm sitting here at my beach house in Australia in my shorts and t-shirt because it's the middle of summer. So a long way from France. But I studied French in high school, and then I continued learning French after I left high school, and I worked for L'Oréal Paris, a French company, for a number of years. So I've had this kind of love of France that's come through the language, really. So I speak the language fluently now, and we travel there a lot. We love France, love the history and the culture, but it's really come through that love of language, and being able to speak the language, which I think generally makes it easier to travel through a country, and also is absolutely essential for research because, for instance, I had a cache of Mizza's handwritten letters to and from Cecil Beaton, the famous fashion photographer, and they're all in French, and she's got terrible handwriting. So, and you've got to translate them in French because no one's translated these letters, and to be able to understand Mizza's voice, you've got to read the letters. So thank God 13-year-old Natasha decided to start learning French in high school, because I might not be sitting here today if I had not done that.
And you touched on your past with L'Oréal, which I definitely wanted to get into. How did you make that writing journey from working for L'Oréal to being a full-time author?
So I always wanted to be a writer. I just didn't really know how to do that. And back when I left high school, so I live in Perth, Western Australia, which is quite an isolated capital city, I've got to say. And back then, there were no creative writing degrees offered here in Perth. And in Australia, it wasn't at that time, and it still isn't really that common for people to travel interstate to study at university. You really stay in your own state, which is very different to the American experience, obviously. So I didn't really know how to be a writer. So I ended up doing marketing and public relations at university because that had a kind of a writing element to it, albeit a corporate writing element to it. Worked in marketing for about 10 or 12 years, and then was living in another state in Melbourne, and had to come back to Perth for my husband's work. He'd followed me across the country, so I had to follow him back across the country. And it meant leaving my marketing job, and suddenly it was like, okay, well, I could just rush back into finding another marketing job, or I could finally, there's this moment in time where I could do something about this writing dream that I've always had and that I still had in my head. And so I decided, by that time there were universities offering creative writing degrees. So I went back to university in my 30s and studied writing and wrote my first book as my master's thesis. And then was lucky enough to get that published, which I was very surprised at and very lucky about. So, and I think it happened the right way. I don't think that, as an 18-year-old at university, I would have had the emotional range or the life experience to be able to write the kinds of books that I write now. So I'm kind of glad about the way it turned out.
What did you learn from your experience working in marketing for L'Oreal that has helped you the most along your writing journey?
I think that writers are expected to do so much marketing themselves these days. So understanding all those basic fundamentals of marketing, like audience and different tools and how to communicate to people. And also a big one is just simply being able to present to people. At L'Oreal, we had to do these big presentations to all the beauty editors at the magazines and to, 300 people in the sales team across L'Oreal. And so you'd have to speak eloquently and be engaging. And of course, as authors, you're going to do a lot of events where you talk about your book. And so I'm used to being able to find the story in the story. So when you get up on stage at an author event to talk about your book, you're not talking about the whole book. You got to find the interesting parts of that to be able to pluck out and convey to people. And so it's basically what I did at L'Oreal. So that those kinds of skills have been immensely helpful. And it means that I quite enjoy the marketing and the public speaking particularly, in a way that maybe I know a lot of writers don't enjoy that part of it, but because it was my background, I don't mind it so much.
So we talked about you live in Australia. Astrid Bricard has been out in Australia already for a while, and now it's just now getting to the US. What's like the biggest challenge for you in writing a book and publishing it in different countries?
I think the biggest challenge is balancing the needs of readers, because obviously everybody in North America, when it comes out in Australia, they're hugely disappointed that they can't access it yet. And you want to and a lot of people don't understand the way publishing works, in that you have different publishers in different countries and they set their own publishing timeframes and their own covers, their own titles, and it's very separate. So some people almost get offended and feel like you've left them out, and they say, what about your North American readers? And I'm constantly trying to say, if it was up to me and you could all have the book at the same time, and obviously as a writer I just want to share the book with everybody. So I'm always worried that people are upset about that, and sometimes they are. So if you're listening to this, don't be upset. Be upset at the publishers, not the authors. We have no control. So that's probably the hardest part, managing reader expectations in terms of, everybody wants to read the book, and I totally understand that. So it's just doing your best to communicate its different publication dates, and I'm really sorry, but it's coming. And it's amazing how many North American readers come up with these amazing plans to get themselves a book sent to them from Australia, from some remote, distant friend, cousins, friends, aunties, uncle kind of thing, which I love too. And they send me photos of it, and I think that's fabulous.
You've published 10-ish books, right around there. What is something you wish you knew when you were starting your writing journey that you know now?
I think that I thought that it would get easier, and it actually doesn't get easier. Every book is as hard as the first or the second book, because you try to extend yourself more as a writer. So you're trying to take on a more challenging project, I suppose, and every book is its own challenge. But also that the writing life is such a roller coaster, and just because someone's successful in one moment doesn't mean that their next book will be successful. But maybe in 3 books' time, they'll have that success again. It's not a constant. It is for a couple of authors, but for most authors, it's a very up and down kind of journey, and you just have to keep writing it, because if you stop, you'll never get the luck that you need to kind of go back up in the roller coaster. So you just got to keep riding the roller coaster and enjoying it. So really, you have to love the writing, because that's what it all comes back to: sitting in front of a computer, bashing out the words. And if you don't love that part of it, then the life probably isn't for you. So so that's probably the kinds of things that I didn't understand at the start that I do now.
And you teach some writing classes as well. What would you say is like your best piece of advice that you would give to someone who wants to become an author?
I think it is just simply sit down and write. A lot of people say they want to write a book, but they never make the time to sit down and start writing. And honestly, the only way it will get written is if you sit down and just put some words down on the page. You don't have to know where the book's going, what the ending is, what the middle is, what the structure is, who all the characters are. You just have to start writing something, and then the story will tend to unfold itself to you. So it's, and a lot of people are kind of, scared of finishing because they're scared of what they will then do with this book. But you've got to sit down and write it, and you've got to finish it. Those are the two pieces of advice that I would give to someone.
Because this is literary hype, what books are you hyped about?
Oh, I am reading a book at the moment called Bright Young Women by, is it Jessica Knoll? Amazing. I'm only halfway through and I am in awe of this book. I mean, it's about some very grisly subject matter, a serial killer in the US, but it's from the women's point of view and the victim's point of view. And she just writes such a compelling story. So I'm totally hyped about that one right now. And just loving it. Total recommend to everybody. And the book I've been raving about all of 2023 was Barbara Kingsolver's Demon Copperhead. Adored. My favourite book. Definitely of 2023, but probably one of my favourite books of all time as well.
Thank you so much for taking the time out of your glorious summer while it's snowing here in Missouri.
Oh, no. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. It was lovely to meet you and great to meet you.
Yes, thank you so much. Wish you all success with this book. It's so good.
Oh, thank you so much. Take care.
You too. Thanks again to Natasha for getting up early to talk to me about her new book, The Disappearance of Astrid Bricard. You definitely want to check this one out. These 3 storylines are absolutely riveting, especially toward the middle when everything gets a little crazy. There's a lot that goes on. It's a pretty chunky book, so there's a lot that goes on in this. You definitely want to check it out. And in case you're nervous about jumping into The Disappearance of Astrid Bricard because you haven't read The 3 Lives of Alix and Pierre, don't worry about it. It's just characters that kind of go back and forth. If you've read the prior books, then you'll kind of have that little Easter egg moment. Oh, I know who that is. But it doesn't stop you from understanding or enjoying the book. This is a standalone, and it is so good with these 3 different women working through generational trauma in a way. If you would like to get your hands on Natasha's books, which I highly recommend you do, the links to do that are down below, and that will help support this channel, which I really appreciate. So definitely check those out. I'd also appreciate if you hit that like button, share this with your friends who are into historical fiction or who might like a historical fiction book with the fashion world. This is being described as Vogue meets Daisy Jones and the Six, so anywhere in that medium, then they definitely want to check this book out. Check out this conversation to introduce them to this book. If you haven't already, click that subscribe button. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.